The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the May 18th, 2020 Westminster City Council meeting. First item on our agenda tonight will be the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Williams, if you could bring up there we go. Thank you, sir. I would ask everyone at home to join us, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Parker, if you would, please take the roll call.
Certainly. Mayor Atchison.
Here.
Councilor DeMott.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Seitz.
Here.
Councilor Seymour.
Here.
Councilor Scully.
Here.
Councilor Smith.
Present.
And Councilor Bowles.
Here.
All right, thank you, Council. Thank you all for being here tonight, and staff as well. Next item on the agenda is item number 3. This is consideration of the minutes of our past meeting of May the 11th. Ms. Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the City Council approve the minutes of May 11th, 2020 as presented.
Ms. Smith.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the approval of the minutes of May 11th, please signify by aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion's carried. Next item on the agenda is presentations. Ms. Parker, I believe we have none scheduled for tonight.
That is correct, sir.
Moving on to item 5. Do you have any receipt of any public comments that were received by the time indicated in the docket for tonight?
No, sir, there were no public comments received by noon today. We also checked just momentarily ago, and there were none at that time either.
Okay, thank you much. Mr. Tripp, I'll go to city officials, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only comment I have is that next Monday being Memorial Day, there will not be a city council meeting. That's all I have for this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Turning to council, do we have any comments? Mr. Voles, you're up first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to take this opportunity. I know these are uncharted times and we're all doing new stuff. I want to thank our staff for the ongoing boards and commission meetings that are online. That's quite a task, but our staff have done a tremendous job, not only do it for council, but also our boards and commissions. And then I also want to thank our boards and commission members for being patient and working through this system and doing a lot of checking and a lot of learning to be able to do meetings online. So thank you to all of our board and commission members and all the residents who've been participated in that and residents who contact us. So thank you all. Thank you very much.
Ms. Scully?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a few things that I would like to announce tonight. First of all, the Parks, Rec, Library, and Open Space Board met last week on Thursday night, had a great meeting discussing the recovery effort from COVID and how we'll be slowly reopening parts of our city, specifically talking about the golf courses, the libraries, and what our plan is. And so that was a great meeting. I will remind people that all of our boards and all of our board meetings and commission meetings are open to the public. And if you want information on how you can be a part of those meetings, I would strongly recommend that you contact our city so that you can get our links. We are doing most things by GoToMeeting right now, and but we are meeting and we are working. A big shout out to all of our high schools in Westminster and our surrounding areas that graduated this last week and are continuing to graduate this week. Best of luck to you all. I know this is a very strange time, but I also know a lot of people are working very hard to help you still celebrate. So lights on the City Hall buildings, lights on the Westminster Station, and then I know that there's a lot of car parades, videos coming out, just a real effort to still celebrate. So please do celebrate and know that our hearts are with you. A big shout out to our Westminster PD. Last week was Westminster PD week, and want to recognize our PD and all those who have made their sacrifice with their life. Please know that our thoughts and prayers are with you always, that you may be safe and well, and that we respect you and care for you and want you to be successful. And then finally, a big shout out to all of our House reps and senators. As many of you probably know, but some of you may not, our House reps and senators weekly are having Zoom meetings and public meetings, live meetings on Facebook, where they can report back to how the state is getting ready to reopen and working toward that effort. And I had the privilege of attending Tracy Kraftarp, Rachel Zenzinger, and Brianna Titone's meeting this last Saturday. They met with the Jefferson County Public School District with guest speakers of Jason Glass and two of our school board members. And I just wanted to acknowledge that real efforts are being made there. There's a lot of work going on. Nothing is finalized, but a lot of great work, and really appreciate the efforts of our state representatives who are taking time to try to be open and available to the public. Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to also congratulate our 2020 Westie seniors who may have graduated last weekend and or this upcoming weekend. I also on Thursday had an opportunity to attend the Adams County Regional Coordination meeting. A lot of that meeting dealt with our schools and budgeting shortfalls that they might be seeing throughout the year, and what the operations will look like in the fall. It seemed like they were taking it week by week as information continually changes, but it seems like they're doing their due diligence to plan for the fall semester. So I also wanted to say a final thank you to residents who continue to email me and our council on thoughts on policy decisions and thoughts on the city. It's important that you let us know how you feel as a council to make sure that your thoughts are being heard. So just wanted to continue that. Thanks. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Mr. DeMott?
Thank you, Mayor. couple quick things. First, I wanted to follow up on what Councilor Voles said. The Inclusivity Board did their first virtual meeting this last week, and I attended that, and it was pretty neat to see people getting back together in those groups and being able to start working on their initiatives that that group works on. I would encourage people to watch the website because there is information how you can attend those meetings virtually when they're available. I know, for example, the Inclusivity Board, you could dial into that GoToMeeting that they had on Wednesday. And so they meet once a month. So I'd encourage people to watch for that. Also, wanted to recognize that we had the moment of silence for those who lost their lives to COVID in Colorado. The governor had that this last Friday, which was also National Police Memorial Day, honoring the fallen officers like Councilor Scully mentioned. So it was a big day, and thanks to all the people who participated in showing remembrance to those that have fallen both in the line of duty as well as those in Colorado who have lost their life to the COVID battle. Thank you.
Any other comments from staff, Mr. Voles?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to just mention that Councilor Scully and Councilor Smith were very instrumental in what this city did to recognize seniors. So congratulations to our seniors and their parents. I know it didn't turn out the way they would have probably hoped for towards the end of this year, but we had a couple council members who really encouraged us and came up with ideas. For instance, Councilor Scully said, light up the building in school colors. So look at our Westminster City website for when that's happening. There's a schedule that's going on this week. And then Councilor Smith also is very instrumental in encouraging all of us to sign on to a video of ourselves congratulating seniors as best we could. I know it's not everything, but it's a step in the right direction to recognize seniors in this kind of time of need. So thank you to Councilor Scully and Councilor Smith for kind of pushing us along and coming up with those great ideas. Thank you.
Okay. Are there other comments from council? Seeing none, I'm going to be the bearer of some bad news that we received today. Ms. Parker and I did. We were notified of the death of a former council member and a former mayor. Marshall E. Dodson was a member of the city council from 1963 to 1973 and served as mayor from 1965 to 1969. He passed on March the 8th. He was living in Georgetown, Texas at the time of his passing. So we have lost a former member of our council, and we regret that, and we wish his family the best and as they try to recover from this great loss. Are there any other comments from council? If not, we'll move to the consent agenda. Seeing no other comments, the consent agenda is a group of routine matters to be acted on with a single motion and vote. I did not poll the council tonight, as we only have one item, and if there's conversation around that when the motion is made, we'll do it at that time. At this time, I'll move to item 8. This is council's bill number 18 on the consent agenda. Mr. DeMott.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the City Council adopt consent agenda item 8A.
Mr. Voles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second the motion.
Is there any discussion on this motion at this time? Seeing none, Ms. Parker, this is a roll call vote, if you will, please.
Thank you. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. Councilor DeMott.
Yes.
DeMott votes yes. Mayor Pro Tem Seitz.
Yes.
Seitz votes yes. Councilor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully.
Yes.
Scully votes yes. Councilor Smith.
Yes.
Smith votes yes. And Councilor Voles.
Yes.
Voles votes yes.
Thank you, council. The roll call vote is a 7-0. We therefore have adopted council bill number 18. There being no appointments and resignations that we're aware of tonight, we'll move on to the public hearing of other new business. The first item up is item 10A. This is resolution number 18. Ms. Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to adopt resolution number 18, reallocating $541,321 in the city's Home Investment Partnership Act fund balance toward a tenant-based rental assistance program.
Ms. Smith.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion by members of the council? Mr. Demott, if you have a comment or a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just looking through this and it was unclear to me. So these funds were originally earmarked for the St. Mark Village affordable housing development. So can somebody from staff tell me why they didn't end up using those funds? I wasn't real clear on that.
Okay. Mr. Tripp?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Demott. I'm going to defer to either Economic Development Director John Hall or Jenny Grafton, who's in charge of this project.
Jenny?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question, Councilor Demott. So those funds have some very specific requirements that go with them, including elements of timing. That project, as I think Council's familiar with, ran into a variety of delays in the course of advancing. And so it reached a point where they needed to make some decisions on starting construction before they had had the opportunity to complete all of their paperwork with HUD. That then required them to, or made them ineligible for those funds. So they have been excellent partners. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It just made those funds impossible to use for this project.
Okay, and so then this move is because of that and in no way impacts the development that they're already doing?
Correct. In fact, they have actually been in conversations with Maker Housing Partners, who will be the ones to administer these funds for the community. And they have bridged that financial gap in the project through a limited partnership with Maker. So it's been a very collaborative process.
Great, thank you very much. That answers my questions.
Ms. Smith, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Jenny, this might be questions for you, so please let me know otherwise. I did email a question regarding, I believe that there was an administrator fee of $65,000, is that correct? And who would be responsible for payment of that?
Sure, thank you, Councilor Smith, and thank you for sending those questions in advance. In addition to answering that, I just want to clarify, because I think there may have been some confusion in the course of the agenda, that the funds we are discussing both in this item 10A as well as in 10C coming up, these are separate and different than the funds that Deputy City Manager Dorr will be presenting a bit later in the agenda in 10D. The home funds in particular are part of a consortium that we are in with Adams County and the City of Thornton. There is $65,000 of total cost to administer the program. That is not all coming from Westminster. That comes out of the total program, which is currently funded at $865,000 pending our contribution. And the county's action on that actually was on May 12th. They did approve moving forward with this program. Thornton has already done the same. So we are the last to provide our affirmative response.
Okay. And then these are federal dollars, correct?
That is correct.
And then the funds run through this year? Is that how I understand it?
So the city receives an annual award of home funds, roughly about $180,000 each year. It varies somewhat. And the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development allows you to pool multiple years into single projects or programs. So we are actually talking about funds from 2017, 2018, and 2019 to make up our portion.
Okay. And then it wasn't clear in our information, but I'm assuming it got approved, that the Board of County Commissioners approved this on May 12th?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Voles?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I just want to make more of a comment than a question. I want to comment and I say great job and thank you and job well done to Jenny Grafton, our Policy and Housing Manager, and Jen Hall, our Director of Economic Development. We had a few weeks ago or more had talked about, well, we were helping businesses to the tune of $1.5 million, which is an excellent idea. We all supported that. Some of us said, well, what are we doing to help those who might be in need for housing assistance and rental help with rental payments? And I think this is an absolutely creative solution. And I am so glad you came forward with this. And I just want to say thank you, and you jumped on top of it. And thank you to the whole team for coming up with a great solution to something that council did deem as an important way to help people in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Other comments from council? Seeing none, Ms. Parker, this is item 10A. It's a roll call vote.
Mr. Mayor, I believe the Mayor Pro Tem just put in a request to speak, if you'd like me
Yeah,
to
I just
yield.
got it. Ms. Seitz, go ahead.
My apologies for that. Apparently, I'm having a little trouble with chat today. So I wanted to real quick also say thank you to staff for coming up with this innovative way to use our home dollars. I do agree. I like the flexibility that the tenant rental assistance or tenant-based rental assistance allows. I just want to clarify, it is my understanding that these dollars can be used for rent for people's existing residences. Is that correct?
That is correct, Councilor Seitz. That is not always the
Yeah.
case with tenant-based rental. However, under COVID-19 provisions, it is.
And then I also want to make sure I'm clear, the typical requirement that someone not have housing has been waived due to COVID-19. So they don't have to have actually had a lapse in housing. They just have to have a demonstrated need.
That is correct.
Okay. I think this is wonderful. I do have a question. This is going to serve very well that population that is 60% AMI and less. However, I have a feeling that there are going to be people at 60% AMI all the way up to maybe 100% AMI that are going to be feeling the really dire economic impacts of COVID-19. And I don't know if we get to parse through unemployment application data, but it would be interesting to see what percentage of our population that falls between that 60 and 100% AMI have lost their jobs. And if having lived through the Great Recession, just knowing how devastating housing instability was on our both local and national economy, I'm wondering if in the future you might be looking at programs to assist that additional, I guess, tier of residents.
Councilor Seitz, thank you for that observation. Yes, absolutely. This is sort of what I would call a first step in our housing assistance. Home dollars are restricted to 60% AMI and below, so that is where this particular funding source would be limited, but that in no way precludes us from looking at other opportunities to assist our residents.
I would highly, I guess, support and encourage looking at some of I think the middle class stands to probably be impacted significantly by this. And we don't have those traditional federal dollars for that. So it might be incumbent upon us to look at different options through potentially those CARES dollars. But thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you.
Are there other comments from council? All right, Ms. Parker, let's try the roll call now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor DeMott,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Seitz,
Yes.
and apologies, I didn't repeat. DeMott votes yes, Seitz votes yes. Councilor Seymour,
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully,
Yes.
Scully votes yes. Councilor Smith,
Yes.
Smith votes yes. Councilor Voles,
Yes.
Voles votes yes, and Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes.
Thank you, council. Resolution number 18 carries on a 7-0 vote. Next item on the agenda will be council item 10B. This is Councilor's Bill number 19. Mr. DeMott.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to pass Councilor Bill number 19 on first reading, providing for a supplemental appropriation of funds to the 2020 budget and the general and general capital improvement funds.
Ms. Smith.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on Council's Bill number 19? Mr. Demott?
Thank you, Mayor. I just really wanted to quickly point out to the public some of what this is, basically some of the funds that were moved into the city's general fund include some donations from some groups in the community. One such group is the Westminster Citizen Police Academy Alumni Association, who donates a lot of time and money to our PD to take care of needs that otherwise aren't being met. And so that is part of the thing that we're voting on tonight, is to be able to accept those funds. So I just wanted to point out and thank those members of the community and different organizations who do things to make sure that our community has the quality of life that we enjoy.
Any other comments from council? Ms. Smith, I think you had a question about the 5,500 for the youth panel. Did you get your answer?
I did not, Mr. Mayor.
Let me try. The 5,500 that you saw in this packet is a donation from an outside company to the youth advisory panel. That does carry over in its entirety. We've kept the entire budget until we know when school is going to come back, and then we can try to reschedule with the hotels when they're back in operation. The youth advisory panel summit is temporarily delayed.
Thank you. May I ask a few more questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Great. I think I did also ask, I believe that there was 84,000 towards, let's see here, my notes, information technology. We have 50,000 going to the IT department. And then my question was, what is the other 34,000 allotted towards?
Finance Director Tammy Hitchens, would you please handle that?
So I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to read it real quickly. It's can I get back to you? But I mean, the 34,000, we do have a credit card rebate. That's from our purchasing cards, and so that just goes into general to be able to general revenues. And as far as the stuff with the IT, there we've just been doing a lot of purchasing of with IT for IT purposes, for getting ready to be working at home and those kinds of things.
Okay. So we haven't earmarked the 34,000.
My guess is, let me pull it up real quickly here. I have so many things open. So maybe Mr. Lindsay has some information on the 34,000.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. This is Chris Lindsay, Assistant City Manager. We do not have an appropriation or a plan to appropriate right now the other $34,000 that's sitting there. I would imagine that towards the end of the year, we'll use that for revenue backfill, where we've seen some losses recently.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's all my questions.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on item 10B? Ms. Parker, this is Council Bill number 19. If you would, please, the roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem Sites.
Yes.
Sites votes yes. Councilor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully.
Yes.
Scully votes yes. Councilor Smith.
Yes.
Smith votes yes. Councilor Voles.
Yes.
Voles votes yes. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. And Councilor Demott.
Yes.
Demott votes yes.
Thank you, Council. Council's Bill number 19 is passed on a 7-0 vote. Next item on the agenda, sure I've got up to date, is item 10C1. This is the adoption of resolution number 19. Ms. Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to adopt resolution number 19, approving an intergovernmental agreement between the city and Adams County regarding the small business stabilization program developed in response to the economic impacts associated with COVID-19.
Ms. Smith,
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion by council on item 10C1, resolution number 19? Mr. Demott.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple quick questions. So looking at this, it looks like if we go into this agreement, the funds are used specifically for Adams County businesses. So I'm just trying to figure out, whenever I see something that's just one side of the city, I'm just curious about that and how we serve the other side. And I didn't know if that's because these funds come from the Adams County funds that we got for CARES, or how that works. And you know, to make sure that we're being equitable is basically what I'm trying to understand.
Mr. Tripp, who would you like to direct it to?
Ms. Grafton, please.
Thank you, Councilor Demott, for that question. Actually, this is one of those cases where, because the amount of funds that the city receives for the community development block grant program is based on our population as a whole, Adams County has agreed to administer those funds on our behalf to businesses in both Adams County and Jefferson County.
Okay, great. That's awesome to hear. I just always like to verify that. So perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was one of my questions. I'll mark that one off. For the allocation of funds, can they be used for anything in order to retain jobs and organizational stability? Because I believe that our Westy Rise grants, those were just for rent and leases. Was that correct? And can this be, are these funds that can be more widespread?
Thank you, Councilor Smith. No, actually, I would say, as is common with community development block grant funds, there are actually a number of restrictions that are over and above what we would have done for the Westy Rise business grant. In particular, CDBG funds have to be used to benefit low to moderate income households. And so this program is designed specifically to retain or create jobs for low to moderate income households. The actual application has to prove that need in very specific terms. When the business receives the funds, they can apply them to rent and mortgage, as well as salaries and benefits. However, the financial need has to be proven on the basis of those salaries.
Got it. Okay. And then one last question. I think I emailed this in as well. If we can use these, the CDBG funds for small business grants such as this, wondering why we tapped into our reserves and not looking into this aspect first.
Certainly. And a number of the businesses that have been able to benefit from our Westy Rise business grant would not have met the eligibility requirements of the CDBG program, but perhaps more important had to do with the timing. So those funds that we've distributed on behalf of the city were immediately available and certainly met urgent need for rent and mortgage assistance. These CDBG funds, we have still not, as of today, actually received those. There's a very prescriptive process that we have to go through in documenting all of this with HUD. So the county has launched the program, and they are fronting funds that will then be reimbursed with CDBG dollars later. And we will go into that pool with our CDBG funds. But again, we have not actually received those yet. So there was a critical timing difference.
Got it. Thank you so much. That's all my questions.
Any other comments or questions from council on item 10C1, resolution number 19? Seeing none, Ms. Parker, let's try a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully. Smith votes yes. Counselor Bowles.
Yes.
Bowles votes yes. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. Counselor Demott.
Yes.
Demott votes yes. And Mayor Pro Tem Sights.
Yes.
Sights votes yes.
Thank you, council. That's resolution number 19 carries on a 7-0 vote. Ms. Scully, would you please start us off on the other part of that one? Item C2.
Yes, sir. I move to pass Councilor's Bill number 20 as an emergency ordinance authorizing a supplemental appropriation amending the 2020 Community Development Block Fund budget per the 2019 action plan.
Ms. Smith,
Second.
I have a motion and a second on item 10C2, Council's Bill number 20. Is there any discussion from council? Seeing no item for discussion, Ms. Parker, this is item 10C2, Council's Bill number 20 for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Counselor Scully.
Yes.
Scully votes yes. Counselor Smith.
Yes.
Smith votes yes. Counselor Bowles.
Yes.
Bowles votes yes. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. Counselor Demott.
Yes.
Demott votes yes. Mayor Pro Tem Sights.
Yes.
Sights votes yes. And Counselor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes.
Thank you, council. That's Council's Bill number 20 carries on a 7-0 vote. Next item up on the agenda is going to be Council's Bill number 21. This is item 10D. And I don't show anybody in the, there we go. Ms. Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to pass Councilor's Bill number 21 on first reading, providing for a supplemental appropriation of funds to the 2020 budget of the general fund for the purpose of expending CARES Act funding deemed necessary due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19.
Ms. Smith.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any questions or comments from council? And let me see who I've got in. Ms. Sights, you're up first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the team who put this together. Over the last few weeks, we've been briefed as council as to kind of the criteria that staff is going to look at to determine how to allocate these CARES funds. Recognizing there may be a second wave of federal dollars to assist with COVID impacts to local governments, but there may not. And so I think that I'd like to understand now with a little more specificity, if at all possible, how the distribution of funds were determined. Economic recovery received significantly more than, two of our other kind of more community and social recovery tranches. So I just wanted to understand how it was allocated, how we're looking at both impact, ROI, and I apologize, I know this is a very high level question, but this is a large amount of money, and I do sincerely think that the impacts are going to be profound. So I want to make sure I'm understanding and we're putting this to the highest and best use. So thank you.
Mr. Tripp.
Mayor Pro Tem Sights, it's a very good question, and it should be, we should take a look at the very high level on this. I think I'm going to start in only because I want to make a comment about the work that's gone in on it and give my high level view of it, and then turn to Deputy City Manager and CFO Larry Dorr, who's led a whole cadre of people since we first became aware of CARES funding on a federal level through our congressional delegation. That we really had no idea how much it might be, what the requirements would be, and we followed it closely. And from that point forward, from the city legal department, finance, financial strategy, we've tracked it, and actually we're able to engage along the way to help influence the ability for an individual city within the requirements to get money. And we were successful in doing that and getting a significant amount. I'm proud to say that both of our counties are sharing a good sum of money to each of our jurisdictions. And that sum in total is $9 million. Now, to the specifics of tonight's action, which is appropriation of those funds, to have them spent by, on the Adams County side, December 4th, and Jefferson County side, December 31st, which is actually closer than you think for a lot of money to be spent in a very defined way. We've been working, many people, 7 days a week, almost around the clock, trying to understand the legislation, work with our legal staff, and then all of the finance directors and legal staffs from multiple jurisdictions to create an IGA, which you've approved, and now get us to the finish line of actually being able to appropriate this money. Even at that, we don't have all the answers today. What we do have for you that I'm proud of, though, is a discernment of the high level reasons that money is being recommended in the way that it is. And the thing I'd say about that is that we want to use these monies in the best way we can to help our overall economy recover and to serve for many years in the future with a recovered economy. In addition to that, we want to pay for those real costs that are out of pocket that the taxpayers here locally never budgeted for and expected going into this year. So, that's my introduction of it, and particularly my thanks to a team that I think has worked in a superior way on this matter. So Larry, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Once again, Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy City Manager. And good evening, Mayor and City Council, and thank you for the question, Mayor Pro Tem Sites. If I may, I'll address that question, and I'll do it also in the context of sort of an overview and also provide a little bit of an update. And if I may, I'd like to ask Mr. Williams if you would kindly put on our council's screen this slide that just gives a little reference for those members of the public who may not have council's agenda in front of them and are looking at our broadcast here tonight. And forgive me, the CARES CRF acronym, we've all been referring to it, but for the sake of the audience, I just want to refer to this as the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which created the Coronavirus Response Fund. So again, my apologies for the acronyms, but we have been analyzing the 900 pages of federal legislation and working, as Mr. Tripp just described, on securing these funds, and council has adopted and agreed to 2 intergovernmental agreements over the last couple of weeks with Jefferson County and Adams County. And we are now poised to receive up to $9 million. We learned this morning from Adams County that we're expecting an ACH transfer of approximately $1.8 million tomorrow. We have just last week submitted our signed intergovernmental agreement with Jefferson County, and we expect to receive about $1.7 million, about half of the funds from Jefferson County later this week or early next week. And from Adams County, the city would be receiving 1/3 of the funds in advance. To repeat, the city will receive those funds in advance and then track and report its spending to the 2 counties as we move along through this. So this won't be a reimbursement, rather the city will receive that working capital up front. And once the initial transfers have been spent and the reports have been filed with the counties, we will receive respectively the next 1/3 or the next 1/2. And I do want to point out one thing, that while we have this December 31st deadline with Jefferson County and also a December 4th with Adams County, in addition, the city is required under the intergovernmental agreement to report a spending plan, a final spending plan, in the month of September, should the city not have dispersed these CARES Coronavirus Response Fund monies, so that Jefferson County can understand if the city can meet that. That deadline is fast approaching, and so hence the urgency in getting approved these intergovernmental agreements and presenting to council what you see here, the guidelines and guiding principles for direction of these funds. So a couple more things, and I'll just get into the 4 categories here. First, I want to say, and I've gotten some questions on this, is can and should the city council be making choices for the disbursement of these funds without better understanding the revenue picture for the city and the revenue impacts that coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic have had on the city's revenue? And the answer to that is whether the city's finances are on target, favorable, unfavorable, they can't really impact these choices because CARES Act funds must be spent on mitigation of COVID impacts, both for city government and for the community. So regardless of the decrease in sales tax revenues or recreation revenues, the city will still have to carry on in mitigating the impacts of COVID-19. So these choices, I appreciate it. It could be received as being contradictory, but regardless of the city's revenue impact, the monies cannot be used to backfill lost revenues. That's very clear and consistent, both in the act itself and the United States Treasury's follow-on guidance. So regardless of the revenue picture, it's incumbent upon the city to carry forward or return these funds to the county and ultimately Washington, D.C. I also want to say that as I'm about to get into some of the high-level overview and maybe even a few details on each of these 4 principles, I do want to have us all keep in mind the level of transparency that is a function of the city's intergovernmental agreements with the 2 counties and the intentions of the city overall to be very transparent and provide every level of detail on funds dispersed under the CARES Act. The city is required to provide absolute line item detail to the counties of all of the disbursements made under CARES. And it's our intention to reveal those on the Westminster City website so that, of course, mayor and council, any other staff member or members of the public can see how CARES Act funds are dispersed. So while I'm about to describe some high-level choices and a little bit of the rationale behind the dollars, not all decisions have been made necessarily at all level, but will ultimately be accounted for under this concept of transparency and reporting. And I can tell you that's a real big function of the CARES Act, and the city intends to comply with all of those functions. So first, economic recovery. Let me just talk a little bit about that. Obviously, I think a couple of council members earlier on tonight's meeting referred to the West Rise Small Business Grant Program. That's been targeted for rental assistance, as was mentioned, and it's primarily been targeted and approved rather for businesses with 50 or fewer employees. And the amount appropriated to that, and as Ms. Grafton described very quickly in March, was $1.5 million. The city will have the opportunity from this $4 million, as you see on the slide, to replenish its reserves or offset, reimburse itself for that 1.5 million that's been dispersed. So that right away is a key plan, because then it allows the city council at some point in the future, should the city council want to use its general reserves for some other purpose, this 1.5 million would have been replenished to that source. So that was sort of the first thought around what might come from economic recovery. But it would still leave a remaining 2.5 million. Obviously, council has had its discussion about face coverings and the expense related to that. And that would be the next money to come from this bucket, if I may call it that, or this guideline or this guiding principle. Beyond that, our economic development department is really working on a plan to respond to what we've learned from a few sources. First, from federal employment data, we've learned that a number of key industries have been impacted the most: leisure and hospitality, retail, and professional services, along with education and healthcare. And our economic development department will be planning to have the greatest impact with these funding sources, either by industry or by activity. And perhaps it'll be something that really has an impact for restaurants. We don't quite know at this point. That's still in the development phase. But we know that very much the businesses within the city of Westminster will be adapting to a new way of doing business that will require retrofitting to their restaurants, to various facilities, and that will come at some great expense that could make businesses viable or not. And that's something that we need to better understand and have a real keen plan around. I can tell you that we've also learned much through our business outreach program. We've called 3,000 businesses in Westminster and had a chance to interview 2,200 of them. And we've learned much from that outreach program, and we'll continue to build on what we've learned from those calls. I will tell you that you can expect updates on the next steps in the economic recovery appropriation, both from our Director of Economic Development, John Hall, and from me as we navigate through COVID-19 and the disbursement of these CARES funds. I've had the chance to talk to council, I think, at your regular and special meetings every week since mid-March, and I'll continue to do that and provide information as we have it and as it develops. So stay tuned for more in the area of economic recovery. You'll notice that, as was mentioned, it's the largest for two reasons. One, it allows the city to recuperate its disbursement from its general reserves. But two, as mentioned, we expect the greatest amount of return on investment, which we intend to track. We believe that we'll get a return by keeping sales tax generating businesses in business, and all businesses that are helped through these programs maintain levels of employment, all of which have indirect impacts on the Westminster economy. Next up is social recovery. And it was mentioned a little bit earlier, the Maker Housing Authority. We all know about Growing Home, the Westminster Food Bank. And we also know about our Human Services Board and the work that has been done in that area. And we believe that these folks and perhaps others will benefit greatly from this contribution in social recovery, which is intended to have the greatest impact on the people of Westminster. And forgive me, I've gotten my words reversed. I'm speaking about people and programs serving people involving food insecurity and those vulnerable to housing interruptions. So that's relative to Maker Housing and Growing Home. Forgive me, I got those confused. On social recovery, I beg your pardon, this is relative to the quality of life for Westminster residents and visitors. And the intent is to evolve mobile services, pickup, drop off, and delivery of our recreation and library programs. We think that there's an evolution happening in this area for our patrons. I think, Mayor and Council, you may have learned just a little bit about our hopes for a virtual 4th of July celebration. And these funds in this area will be strategized and planned across our Department of Parks, Recreation, and Libraries, headed up by our Department Director, Jason Gank. More to come in the area of social recovery and people and programs serving people. And last but not least, local government recovery. We have many costs already related to this, but we'll have many more in the immediate future and between now and our spending deadlines. I gave a few examples in your last meeting. First, I talked a little bit about hazard pay. And I got a question about hazard pay and is it different than sick pay? And it is. Sick pay is for those folks who aren't present at work. Hazard pay is for those who are present at work and presented with exposure, potential exposure to COVID-19 in the course of their work duties. We're still developing a policy and a plan around that. We will be sharing that with council at the right point in the future. We're also trying to understand what our neighbors are doing so that we can be sure and recognize and compensate those Westminster employees who are in harm's way as they're carrying out their duty for the community. We want to make sure that that compensation is fair and comparable, perhaps to what's happening at other agencies. So that's still developing. We also know that our way of doing business in our various facilities will take modifications. We will need to do symptom screening. We will have to have various plexiglass protection at our front counters and things like this. We think we'll have significant facility modifications. We have a group of people working on understanding first what those are and what might be the costs related to that. And we also know that we're using here tonight this GoToWebinar and other telecommuting and virtual communication devices, hardware and software. And we know that we'll have some costs related to that we've already incurred, and we'll have some more in the future. That's another sort of information technology being a bucket within a bucket. And then last but not least, we will probably have some staff costs that are eligible for reimbursement under the CARES Coronavirus Response Fund. So with that, I hope that those comments address at a very high level each of the buckets, and then some of the rationale on the allocations there too. The idea to first backfill some disbursements already from general reserves, cover some immediate costs of the city, have an impact on our social activities in the public, and then also give a thought to food security and rental assistance through our partnership. So Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for your patience, and thank you for the opportunity to just kind of talk about that on a couple of different levels. And I hope I addressed some of the questions that may have come up. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that detailed explanation. And I want to make sure you know that you have been abundantly clear that CARES dollars are simply for reimbursement for CARES expenses that we only incurred because of COVID, rather, not CARES, because of COVID. So I think you've been clear, and my apologies because I don't feel I was clear in my question. You answered it anyways, which really was the second portion of your answer. You know, I know you were saying you're getting some high-level federal employment data that's helping you understand specifically which sectors of the economy have been impacted. And I believe you mentioned leisure, hospitality, retail, education, healthcare. These all also happen to be predominantly women-employed industries. And so I think it's interesting to try to understand what are the full impacts to that, and do some of those impacts fall into some of our other buckets, the people and programs for people and the social bucket. You know, so I guess I wanted to make sure that there's enough room for innovation as we are seeing the COVID-related pain points that are forcing us to act. You brought up how Parks and Rec is working to try to change their model to meet where people are at. And we may come up with opportunities to really serve our community that weren't budgeted for, that are related to COVID-19. I just want to make sure that we have enough buffer to be able to act if we do some of these trends become apparent. And so, you know, today we're thinking rental. Tomorrow, maybe we're actually wanting to focus more on employee retention or childcare for essential services, or hotspots, Wi-Fi hotspots in our city so people can look for jobs or fill out, you know, I don't know what the need will present, but I just want to make sure that there is enough room within here, the way it's allocated, that we have the ability to react. Because I will be honest, I have spent 6 years learning and understanding that housing stability is as vital to our economic solvency as a city, because we are so sales tax based. Every time someone is house burdened or house insecure, those are dollars that people are, you know, those dollars are missing from our local economy. And so it really does have the impact to erode all of our ability to fund core services. So that was the meat of my question, and you did a good job answering it. I just would like a follow-up on the flexibility portion of my question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Let's see, as I talked a little bit about some of the opportunities here, and there are a few assumptions, and I want to address those in terms of our flexibility. Before I do that, I just want to describe this as one of the most fluid, ever-changing situations that I've ever seen in terms of new federal legislation, new guidance on that legislation, and all of the changes. This plan is based on what we know at the moment, and we anticipate there could be some changes in the future. I just want to talk by way of example about people and programs serving people. The assumption in this is that our partners at, I just gave some examples, but we'll want to be communicating with them if this is approved by council tonight. But we can't assume that those partners will have the capacity and the ability to disperse these funds on our timelines as well. If we partner with one of these agencies, they have to disperse the funds to their participants by these various deadlines. And so we're making an assumption that they would even be able to do that. If they can't, I think we have the agility within these various guiding principles, assuming they don't change, in order to get these funds working in the Westminster community. So yes, I described under economic recovery, we're still developing that program in whole. Under social, same thing. And in particular, under local government recovery, there are a lot of costs that we can't quite anticipate, but we feel that if we don't fund those costs from CARES, we will otherwise be responding to those with our general reserves. And that, of course, we need very dearly in order to maintain our operations and position the city as best as possible for emergence post-COVID-19. So there is some agility here. Certainly, if there are any policy changes that are necessary, we would certainly come right back to City Council. And let me also say that internally, we're working very hard in our Innovation and Communications Division with our entire workforce around crowdsourcing innovative ideas that will help city government evolve its business in the coming days, weeks, and months as we begin providing services after we are sort of at the top or the flattening part of the curve, as we've all been discussing. So yes, we are working on innovations internally that we think will have some impact and utilize a lot of these local government recovery funds to the extent possible. And may I say that a lot of that, those crowdsourcing and innovative ideas may be on collecting revenue as well through enhanced services, that could benefit the community in this new environment. So a lot of that work is coming out of the ground. I do want to assure you there's quite a bit of flexibility in each of these four principles, some more than others. Under the area of local government recovery, I've already described we have a plan that we're formulating around hazard pay, and I can say that that's bolstering up and probably something for us to talk about with council in the next couple of weeks, probably not Memorial Day Monday since we won't be meeting, but probably at our subsequent meeting. So there are some things that we've gotten the signal from council to proceed on, and others where we're relying on partners who may or may not have the capacity. So there's a long way of saying, yes, I believe there's a lot of innovation and flexibility in these appropriations, and we will respond as needed. Thank you.
Ms. Seitz, is that all your questions?
It does answer my questions, and I appreciate Mr. Dorr or Deputy City Manager Dorr taking the time to answer them. I will probably have questions in the future, but I appreciate the work that's been done and the thoughtfulness and the flexibility. So thank you.
Mr. DeMott?
Thank you, Mayor. You've answered some of my questions, but I really am still trying to look at this and think about a little bit more detail. This seems, I know things are fluid and we're moving, but this is a big action, and along the same lines of flexibility, I'm concerned that we aren't quite there yet, I guess is my concern. Like you talked about a little bit about the $4 million in the economic recovery bucket. And in that bucket, you said that potentially, it sounded like, if I understood you right and followed you, Deputy Dorr, that it was, it could potentially reimburse us for the $1.5 million. My preference, I guess, would be that would, we use that 1.5 because we felt that we were in a place that the city had that in its coffers to be able to expend it and not be hurt because of it. So in that light, I would, and I think I brought this up last week, that I would hope that the goal would be to help as many businesses as possible. And I know that a couple of us had asked how we potentially expand that Westy Rise program. I know initially when it came out, Mr. Hall had shared with us that, for example, some of the businesses who didn't qualify might have been because of the time, that you guys were looking at, as far as like, here's when we wanted to see if that business wasn't in compliance with this list of rules. So I'm hoping you can talk to me a little bit about that and how that might actually be expanded from the 1.5 opposed to us being reimbursed for it.
Thank you, Councilor DeMott. Yeah, no, I think we'll be sharing quite a bit more information and details on economic recovery in the near future. I just want to say it this way. I'm very interested and working very hard to make sure that no funds are returned to Washington, D.C. That's sort of my first concern. So if the city council were to reimburse its general reserve with that 1.5 million, that 1.5 million could be reutilized or spent at some point in the future beyond our December 31st deadline, giving council the greatest flexibility of all, which is, I think, probably in all of our best interests. Let me see if I can take a try at describing that once again. So this 1.5 million that's been dispersed already through Westy Rise, it's eligible for reimbursement. If we declare it as an eligible reimbursable cost, that 1.5 million will not be sent to Washington, D.C. In a subsequent action, in a subsequent effort of the city council, and our economic development department will really do justice to this if this amount is approved, we could present choices that do exactly what you describe. And if it's the will of council, we will utilize those under my suggestion. And I have a real strong suggestion because, again, my desire is to not see these funds go back to Washington, D.C. But later, if council decides, we did reimburse our reserves, that money's not going back to Washington, D.C. It's January of 2021. And now we think as a city council, the best use of those funds that we reimburse to our reserves would be to do the following program. Then the city has the flexibility to do that and doesn't risk returning those funds. So I think it's a way of accomplishing the same goal, Councilor, but it really protects those funds from potentially going back to Washington, D.C. I could really expand on that. And I will tell you that we'll have lots more detail and program description from our economic development department in the coming days and weeks, should this be approved. But I just want to check with you. Did it make sense what I'm describing in terms of reimbursing?
I mean, it does make sense. And I mean, and I understood as you explained it, but I guess I'm just voicing my concern, and my concern is that we, as quickly as possible, get this money back to our local businesses to actually help economic recovery, because that, to me, is what economic recovery is. And so I understand we might have needs down the road, but I guess I want to be assured that we are not sitting on the funds just to see what happens in January, in the guise of not sending it back. If we get to a point where we want to make sure that we have it available because we still may need it, and does that make sense? I just don't want to pause or anything or say, oh, we're going to kind of keep that in reserve. If there are still businesses in the city that needs aren't being met. One of the examples that I used last week was, a new business, small business is very important. And a new small business in their first, second year may have a lot of troubles as they become solvent. And I think one of the saddest things I've seen in a lot of this situation is you have business owners that are either in that frame, or they're just finally starting to make it in years 3 to 5, when a lot of small businesses start kind of finding their groove. And so I had spoke before that I want to see if there's potential that we could look at some of those ones that we didn't qualify in that other thing. So I want to make sure that we're not only making sure that we have this money available to us, but that we're also expanding to make sure that we can help as many businesses survive this as possible in the city of Westminster.
Thank you, Councilor. Yes, understood, and points taken on all fronts. I think we have a goal to secure these funds, but also make sure that they're activated for the benefit of the community. So point taken. I know that our Director of Economic Development, John Hall, is on the meeting tonight and heard exactly what you had to say. And so we'll all be keeping that in mind as we move forward. It just really has a way of allowing the funds to become unrestricted. I think we're pretty well on the same page in terms of what it can accomplish. So let us recall that we will account. Oh, I guess this comes under transparency as well. We will account for this $1.5 million. I know you won't let it get lost in the shuffle either, and we will continue to track that going forward. But points taken.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope, like, as you move along, that maybe we could see a little bit more detail. And I think a couple of the counselors had alluded to that last week about maybe starting to see, if possible, like how the funds were expended with the businesses. I have a couple other questions though. So thank you for answering it on that portion. Some of the other things that you had talked about is the services. And so one of the things that I was curious about, exactly is like who the partners are. And you mentioned a couple, but if we don't even know that, there's a couple things. One, it didn't sound like we know that we haven't identified partners yet. And I guess I'm also concerned about how we identify those partners. So if you had mentioned about Human Services Board, with the Human Services Board, that's a citizen run group that comes up with their recommendations, gives them to council, and then we approve them. Obviously, we have some ability to disagree. I've not seen that happen before, as they come up with good suggestions. So I'm just curious, the oversight of that portion of it. Is the city just going to be deciding what partners are going to be the the nonprofits that are able to benefit from those funds, or what exactly are we thinking on that? Because it did sound like that part really isn't quite baked, and that makes me a little bit hesitant. So I'd just like you to expand, if you can, on that.
Thank you. Let's see. In terms of who those partners might be, I think our first step is identifying a real strategic short list of potential partners. And then I think perhaps some outreach and communications. By the way, this is just under the assumption that this appropriation is approved by council. Should it be, I think it would involve some outreach by the right people on staff to understand if those kinds of partners have the capacity to disperse funds under the CARES Act limits. And if they can't, if they don't have the staff, if they don't have the need, if they don't have the reach to do that, then it just wouldn't go any further than that. But should they have the ability to do that and be able to present some sort of plan, I envision that the details of that specifically coming back to council before funds might be dispersed, unless there are very few and very limited choices. So say, for example, I know you mentioned the Human Services Board. A next step for me, should this be approved tonight, would be to reach out to the Human Services Board to describe this a little bit. I know that they had a light discussion of this last week and the potential for doing it. But I know that it is a history of those choices coming back to the city council and having some approval process before funds would be dispersed. So I would envision council having that kind of involvement and oversight in those kinds of choices, but council probably having less involvement in hardware and software and laptop choices and things like that, those kinds of details that I would not expect council to be interested in. So we'll strike the right balance, but clearly in the area of people and programs serving people, I would anticipate those having more discussion up front, but I think we would as staff do a lot of the initial legwork to find out which partners are even capable. So it is a balance, and hopefully that strikes the right dimension that Mayor and Council are thinking in terms of the partnerships.
And is it does, thank you. On that services piece, you spell out in the agenda housing, food security, vulnerable impact population. So are those the only human services that the CARES Act allows those dollars to go to? Because the reason I ask, typically those services live with the county, and obviously the county decided to share these funds with the city. So I could kind of see the partnership there, but I could think of other human services nonprofit organizations who have been severely impacted by this, like everybody else, that do provide important needed things, like maybe Jefferson Center with mental health, Ralston House, who is a partner of basically all the municipalities around us. So I'm just curious, does it spell that out, or was that our kind of our decision to go with that group?
Thank you. I tried to catch it in the third bullet point here. For those not seeing it, it's aid to external partners. And my goal there, Councilor DeMott, was to really try to be broad. And, I could even envision, with council's input, it including maybe a foothills animal shelter. If it's the policy direction that might be suitable and they're a partner who's capable of dispersing the funds. The CARES Act first says no revenue backfill to any government. So that's pretty clear. Beyond that, it's mitigating any impact that wasn't budgeted prior to March 1st. So that is a little bit more broad. So yes, to my mind, you mentioned Ralston House. I think that they would also be a part of a short list of potential partners, and would probably involve that outreach. And I think that staff would describe to Mayor and Council the list of partners that we reached out to, and then those list of partners who are capable of meeting the deadlines and have actual expenses related to mitigating COVID-19 response, and on and on. And then the next layer in the funnel, if I could describe it visually like that, is here are the folks that we're capable of partnering with and the capacity that they could handle dollars wise and so on and so forth. And then, really present that to council so that we believe that we're having the right impact and the full impact on the Westminster community.
Great, thank you. And then I have some questions on the last group here, the local government response. So, I know that you guys are still kind of trying to break this out. So I don't know if you have a little more detail about the difference between these. So the two that I'm specifically kind of interested in, it's like how much money you think would go into facility modifications. I know that we've had a substantial amount of money that we've done to different, or to at least like City Hall, but I imagine this is like parks and all the different facilities where people come to for us. And then I'll just ask the last part so you can hit both things and I can let somebody else take a turn. The other thing I'm curious about is the hazard pay. So I've brought this up before. I know some other cities across the country have been doing things for their first responders who are out there, having to be right in the face of the situation. So I'm curious if you have any more detail around that, because it is something that I've brought interest to the table in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. Yes, I think I'll work in reverse order and first talk about hazard pay. We are working on a couple of different models that relate to the finances. We think this could be as much as $500,000, depending. I will describe that policy to council as we get it further defined. One of the challenges that we're having in this area is, as I mentioned during my overview, We want to recognize the professionalism of our staff in the face of this pandemic, those who are on the front line. But we also want to recognize those who are working behind the scenes to keep facilities clean and to interface with the public in different ways other than our firefighters and police. So we want to understand that. And we also want to understand that the hazard pay that the city of Westminster might provide would be competitive to what some of our neighbors are providing. And, I have to say, again, it's such a fluid process. Some are doing this already. Others are contemplated. I happen to know, by way of example, that this exact conversation is happening with the Aurora City Council tonight. So while it hasn't been decided, we as the city of Westminster don't want to wait till everybody's implemented their who might implement a potential hazard pay plan and then make a choice, because that could be many weeks into the future. And we're eager to recognize those workers who've been dealing with this for over 2 months now. So we want to proceed to that. And of course, I will be keeping mayor and council informed. But, we're doing a model that's potentially as much as $500,000 or more, depending. And by the way, we're still working quite a bit with our internal departments to really understand the logistics of it and how it might work.
Do you envision that being something retroactive since it started, or something moving forward? Or do you know?
We're anticipating it being retroactive, and that it may continue through May. We know that some of our neighbors are compensating through April, and a lot of different variables. So we're taking all of those things into consideration. Related to facility modifications, we think this could be between 500,000 and $1 million. Some things we still need to design. We just need to understand what all of the symptoms screening hardware and software look like. This is very preliminary because we have many facilities. I'll just use City Hall by way of example because it's familiar to most people. Just think of our entrances and exits, the way that our restrooms look, and our city council chambers themselves, may need to have some reconfigurations, based on our new paradigm. So we're really in the early phases of this, but we have put some good effort into trying to understand each of our facilities and the potential modifications needed. And I also want to underscore telecommuting. We know that that's a definite going forward, and something that we've already spent quite a bit of money on already, but that's certainly going to be in the multiple hundreds of thousands. So as you see, it is going to scale up pretty quickly, but it leaves potentially some funds, as Mayor Pro Tem Sites asked about, where we'll have, I think, some flexibility in dealing with costs that we have yet to see. So again, there's also some flexibility in this local government recovery guiding principle.
Sure. And I imagine with those modifications, we're trying to do those in a way that it's the least amount of things that we would have to roll back once, we're kind of on the other side of this.
Yeah, certainly some will be immediately and temporary, but others, may very well be permanent for an entire generation. One never knows. We're really kind of digging into the analysis and preparation of that right now. But we'll be able to describe those as we move forward. Again, some being short-term temporary, others being much longer term. So it's probably a mix.
Great. Thank you very much for your answers.
Ms. Smith, you have a comment or questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I have several, and thank you, Mr. Dorr. You've already answered several of my questions. I think in your presentation, I know you touched on the mobile services. Can you, I didn't quite understand what those services were that we provide. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Thank you. Yes, I tell you what, I may just invite Jason Gank, our Director of Parks, Recreation, and Libraries, to come on in a moment here. Jason, if you could prepare to do that, that would be great. And I may not have done the best job describing mobile. Some of those things might involve virtual experiences, and I touched on that a little bit in my presentation. But I think that Director Gank envisions cultural and art type experiences for the community to be in mobile settings. So Mr. Gank, if you're available, sir, could you maybe just expand on that just a little bit for Councilor Smith?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Smith. I appreciate the question. The question was maybe give some examples about bringing mobile services to the community. And perhaps one of the best examples might be, as folks, as our libraries, as an example, are not accessible to the community, and we have to rethink about how folks are going to be doing things like job application, using internet, using computers to do research and prepare for that next phase, which is already highly popular in our libraries. We need to think about how can we rethink that, because there's folks in our community, many folks in our community that don't have access to either a computer or an iPhone or those types of resources. So one example would be, let's say you bring a mobile hotspot in the community on some sort of a truck, and that truck would also include things like collections, materials, our collections of our materials, as well as things like job preparedness, assistance and support and that sort of thing, and advertise and promote that will be at different areas in the community. So bringing that service, as we talked about, in a mobile way out in the community for them to have access to that, particularly when we don't know for sure when we're back in our libraries, and even when we are, as we're phasing that in, how many folks could be using those terminals. And we also understand the scope of that service delivery, which is, say, the use of our computers. That's going to be changing anyway. So that's one, I think one example.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions involve educational services. I know that we just, council approved an educational program around the requirement of masks and what that looks like for our community. I'm assuming that some of these dollars in the CARES Act can be provided towards that educational programming.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Smith. And thank you, Mr. Gank, for responding to those mobile services questions. I appreciate that. Let's see. Yes, communication and outreach would be eligible for CARES Act CRF fund reimbursement. So yes, to the extent that our economic development department is making communications, these outreach calls and staff involved in that, all of those things would be eligible for reimbursement. And no doubt, many of those things are effective electronically, which might not cost a lot of money, but other businesses might be more responsive to regular mail. But that our department will evaluate those in the best ways to make outreach. And yes, so those communications will be eligible as well.
Okay, thank you. And I would assume, because I believe in the update from Mr. Kirschbaum last week, we've already incurred about $230,000 of expenses just within COVID. Since those were prior to the indication that we would be receiving those funds, those are reimbursable expenses too, is that correct?
Well, two things on that. Yes, Director Kirschbaum is continuing to track and monitor those expenses, and we'll have additional ones as we move through. First and foremost, we want to collect from FEMA as much reimbursement for those costs as possible. And it's a mix, of course, of what may or may not be reimbursable and how long it might take for the city to be reimbursed for those. But we want to try to seek reimbursement for as much of those expenses as possible. And then to the extent that they're not reimbursable under FEMA, we will be able to reimburse general funds because CARES allows for expenses related to COVID-19 that date to the 1st of March that were otherwise unbudgeted. So provided that those expenses occurred during that period, yes, the city would be able to reimburse itself from CARES.
I'm going to interject here, please. I got a text message that the mayor has lost his audio and video. Michelle, Herb, have you gotten back on?
I show him as connected, City Manager Tripp, but I am not seeing.
Okay, I'm not hearing. We're not hearing from him. So,
okay,
Mayor Pro Tem, maybe you should recess so we can.
Yes. Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I apologize. Oh, Herb, are you back? Mr. Mayor, are you back?
We're going to need to take a short recess. I can't keep connectivity here from City Hall. So we'll pause for a few minutes while I let IT take a look, see if we can figure out why I'm losing. Because I lost video and audio both right as Ms. Smith started. So take a pause. We'll be back as soon as we can. All right, Ms. Parker, we still have everybody back?
I can verify if you'd like, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, the IT group here is still trying to figure out why we're losing it here, so he's going down. Give it a couple of seconds for the IT to get back downstairs. And then we'll try to make sure everybody's on.
Will do. Thank you, sir.
Once we restart, Ms. Smith, I'm gonna come back to you again, let you finish your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Ms. Parker, do you show everyone still connected?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Would you like me to call a quick roll?
No, that's all right. If you show them all connected, if I'm missing anyone, just go ahead and pop up. I'd like to return to Councilor Smith's questions. We had started with Mr. Gank. If you could start with your piece over, so we make sure we got all that recorded.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make sure that you asked me to restart my section to make sure it was recorded. The question that I was asked previously was about some examples of mobile programs and coming back with my response. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
Correct.
Okay, yes, sir. Sure, be happy to do that. So I was asked about an example of mobile programs as it relates to the question as far as looking into the future, as far as the changing of library services. Right now, patrons have limited to no access to technology, certainly if they're relying on the library for that. So we do programs like job preparedness, access to the internet, research, that sort of thing. And as we look at the evolution of our programs and services, ways that we can bring those services out into the community for a couple of reasons. One, because currently the libraries are closed, but also we're anticipating some of the protocols changing as far as set computer terminals inside the library. So we want to find a better way to bring those services out into the community, advertise as such, by creating things like mobile hotspots. Let's say a truck, as an example, that would have the ability to check out laptops and materials and that sort of thing. So that was one of the examples I gave on the bringing out the mobile services. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Smith, you want to continue?
Mr. Mayor, I also asked another question to Mr. Dorr. Do you need him to repeat that?
If you got your question answered, I'm okay.
Okay. I'll continue on with my questions then. Mr. Dorr, the symptom screening, and maybe this is more appropriate for Mr. Kirschbaum, but the symptom screening, is that, I'm assuming that would be in line with CDC recommendations. I haven't seen anything per the state level of what that would look like for municipalities and or businesses. Can you dive into that a little bit and explain more what that symptom screening would be and what that would look like?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Councilor Smith. Once again, Larry Dorr, Deputy City Manager and Chief Financial Officer. Let me first just describe it in the context of the CARES Act and the costs and funds related to that. Yes, we think that there will be expenses related to symptoms testing, which involves taking people's temperatures and sort of these infrared thermometers that don't make contact with the person, but check their temperature. And also there are various applications and questionnaires and so forth, and I mean computer application technology solutions that allow potentially visitors, employees of the city to describe and attest as to whether or not they're experiencing physical conditions along with their temperature that indicate that they could be a risk for carrying COVID-19. We're still in the very early stages of what those costs may be and what may be needed. I believe that yes, and Mr. Kirschbaum has been guiding our team on CDC guidance and very objective criteria that are independent from the city, but probably in line with CDC and costs related thereto. So we have not yet developed any policy around that. That is certainly be forthcoming about how to manage visitors. And I think Deputy Manager Opie, of course, is leading that for City Hall, and we'll have much information on that coming in the future as it develops. However, the costs of mitigating those symptoms or detecting those symptoms through various tools would be mitigated through this CARES appropriation.
Okay, thank you. And did I understand or misunderstand that we do not yet have a policy as far as staff and reporting to work as far as symptom screening and or masks?
Let me see. There are two things there. I'll go in reverse. Yes, the city does have a policy about face coverings for our workforce in place now. I can't remember when that went into force, but it's been several days now, maybe 20, 30 days or so since face coverings first came on to the discussion overall. So yes, that's already happening in our workforce. And then in terms of a policy of staff returning, no, we do not have that policy. However, you'll recall that Director Kirschbaum has given the conditions that are present. And of course, we do have, we anticipate it being this cracking of the valve. You're familiar with that expression. And in the interim, the golf courses have begun. I have to be careful. They haven't quite opened in terms of pro shops and restaurants and all that kind of stuff, but golfers are allowed to come play around, if I can just describe it that way. So we will be phasing in. There won't be one policy or one date. It will be based on a lot of different factors going in, but the return of those workers is still tied to these CARES funds and the city's ability to make facility modifications and adapt to those additional costs and changes in the workplace.
Thank you. Jumping off of what you just mentioned was facility modifications. I mean, how far have we dived into this, and what are we looking at all facilities across Westminster? Are we looking at city vehicles and what that looks like for shared use? Can you describe to me a little bit more about what that looks like for safety mitigation?
Thank you. Yes, and I guess maybe facility isn't broad enough. First, let me say that we're talking about City of Westminster government facilities and not privately owned businesses, those types of things. But my gosh, there is so much happening in this dimension. Yes, those things could be funded by CARES, but you know what I'd like to do is invite Deputy City Manager Barbara Opie. Barbara, if you could come on the line and address what facility means. And of course, that means facilities are buildings, vehicles, and lots of different things. Barbara?
Thank you, Larry. Yes, so as it relates to facilities, it can mean a variety of things. We are taking into consideration, obviously, the physical assets, the buildings themselves, We have not dived into whether there are modifications necessary associated with the vehicles. What we have been implementing as part of our protocols, and Max Kirschbaum, our Public Works and Utilities Director, could speak to this if we need to. But what most of the operations have been doing is limiting the number of people where a crew cab might normally carry 4 people right now. They're not necessarily putting 4 people in a crew cab to take them to a work site. They're doing variations of that depending on where we are in the process. And so that's part of that modification component. But specifically to the facilities, I think the most significant component at this point is dealing with the clear protector guards, also known as sneeze guards, for example. And those are items that right now we're able to order a good chunk of them, and we also are manufacturing some in-house as well. So our facility staff is being very creative with how they're approaching this and trying to make sure that we're doing things that protect the public and staff, as well as obviously still protect the integrity of the facility.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Deputy Opie. I would just like to add, in as much as we're on Councilor's Bill 21, that much of the work that Deputy Opie is doing, we would be able to fund under this bullet 4 on my previous slide, local government recovery. So we anticipate a lot of the cost to cleaning and sanitizing rather, of our various facilities and vehicles can be accomplished under Deputy Opie's leadership and plan in this area.
Thank you for that extra information. I guess not really my final question. I don't know if it's more of a question as it is maybe a concern, but I understand from your presentation that you're looking to utilize all the funds and not return any at the federal level. Well,
I apologize, Councilor Smith. I need to interrupt you to let you know we have lost the mayor again and need to pause.
Okay,
My apologies. But I didn't want your great thought to be lost on only 6 of us. We need all 7 of us. So
fair enough. Thank you.
Break it. We have a phone number.
Let's see, are you gonna do it?
Ms. Parker, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna have to switch from a computer audio back to a telephone, which I've just been able to dial in. So as soon as we can get the screen back, we'll continue on and I'll be on the telephone. I'll still be able to see, I believe, what's going on in the meeting. So give us another minute or so.
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, as long as I can see here. Okay, I think we're there now. Okay. All right, Ms. Parker, let's see if we've got everybody on the line. And Ms. Opie, if you can hear me, you were explaining the pieces that Ms. Lindsay had asked about in regards to facilities.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, did you want me to repeat that information?
If you would, please. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure, certainly. We're discussing what facility improvements or what facilities might entail. And I was mentioning that some of the things some of the modifications that have already been made as far as, like, for example, she brought up vehicles, that we were modifying how staff are utilizing the vehicles where we have like a 4-person crew cab, might be utilizing it for 1 or 2 people instead, things of that nature to ensure that we're doing some social distancing for the current time being. As far as facilities are concerned, specific, for example, for City Hall, I was referencing probably the most noticeable difference will be associated with the use of the clear screens, also commonly referenced as sneeze guards. Those kind of installments, making sure that we're doing a variety of facilities. Team has been doing an excellent job of identifying opportunities to purchase those, as well as when we need custom ones to be able to make them in-house. So they're utilizing both components to prepare us for the reopening of our various facilities and making sure that we're protecting both the public and our employees, as well as ensuring the integrity of our facilities and making sure that they meet those standards as well.
All right, Ms. Smith, have you got other questions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. And I'll try and finish up. It seems like my questions are maybe causing some of the server errors. So, very quickly, I guess this is a multi-part question. What happens when we start spending these dollars, these CARES dollars, and don't end up receiving the $9 million that we were projected? Because I know in the board packet, it does say projected to receive approximately $9 million. So if you could answer that. And then the other question is, well, I understand that in your presentation, Mr. Dorr, that you want no funds returned at the federal level, which I can appreciate to an extent, but I also then have concerns because early on in this, we've said that we've had enough reserves to take the city through this pandemic phase. And so is that being responsible, taking more dollars than we need? And then I balance that with the pros and cons of looking at it as maybe this could help save some of our reserves in the long run and spread it further. So if you could talk and touch on both of those questions. I know they're kind of big. I just kind of wanted to get them out so that we have them on record. But if you could touch on those for me and expand more on the explanation, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Once again, Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer and Deputy City Manager, and thank you for everyone's patience with our technology here tonight. First, regarding the reimbursement item and the projected receipt. Let's see. Adams County will be paying the city 1/3 of the committed amount. They're under an agreement to provide those funds, and they will providing 1/3 in advance. And when those funds are spent, another 1/3 will be paid in advance. When those funds are spent, the final third will be paid in advance. And if any funds are unspent, they will be returned to Adams County. So that's why we're saying it's a projected $9 million. Jefferson County is the same, but it's 1/2, 1/2. So I guess it's not the same. It's slightly different, 1/2 and 1/2. There is no risk of the city, quote, not being reimbursed because the city will receive the money in advance and reimburse and actually reimburse the county for what the city does not spend. And so we can only therefore project the $9 million. And to be technically correct, it's slightly less than that, as in our report. To be specifically correct, it is $8,978,448. As to your question about the city utilizing its fair share and the city utilizing less of its reserves, that is indeed true. If the city did not receive these $9 million, it's possible that I can't imagine that the city would utilize its general reserves as a matter of prudence to pay money to partners for rental assistance and food security. I don't imagine that the city would be able to provide as much as a $4 million stimulus to businesses for economic recovery in the Westminster economy. I can tell you, in fact, quite certainly that the city would very unlikely have the resources to do that. So it's only because of this CARES Stimulus Fund Act that the city has the resources to disperse some $4 million into the Westminster economy. As for local government recovery, we would probably have to make do with significantly less. So these are real impacts. This is what Congress has intended these funds to be dispersed for. And so I think it's incumbent upon us and allows for, frankly, the taxpayers of Westminster who paid those federal taxes to receive those monies back into the Westminster community. So that's somewhat of the philosophy of collecting and dispersing CARES Act funds.
Thank you, Mr. And Mr. Mayor, I'm finished with my questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Smith. Mr. Seymour, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank my councilors and Mayor Pro Tem Sites. They've asked the questions that I had some thoughts on. So just a couple very quick comments. I appreciate the fact that we're weighted heavily towards the economic recovery. No economic recovery, no services. So I'm hoping too, if we find some areas that we're not able to partner with, that we can backfill that towards that top line. And I'm also heartened to find out that we're having a serious discussion moving forward in hazard pay, especially for those frontline people who have been responding from day one. A shout out particularly to Westminster PD and Westminster Fire. So that's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Voles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had, so I came into the meeting tonight with several questions and they've been answered. Mr. Dorr, thank you for your presentation. You actually answered most of my questions prior to getting into questions, and then my colleagues on council asked excellent questions. So I only have a couple quick things. I just want to confirm that the $571,000 that we in home funds that we approved tonight is not built in or included in the $728,000 from social recovery, the $750 from people programs serving people.
Oh yeah, thank you, Councilor Voles. As Ms. Grafton described earlier, I will reiterate that that is not inclusive in these CARES CRF funds that are before us here in Councilor's Bill 21. In fact, the CARES Act disbursed 2.2 trillion with a T to various initiatives across the United States. One of them contributed funds to the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development oversees the Community Development Block Grant, and hence those funds are coming through that vein, if I may describe it that way, but it is an additional source of funds. It's actually those funds that Ms. Grafton described have even further restrictions, but just to confirm, they are not a part of Councilor's Bill 21. They are completely independent. Thank you.
Well, great. Yeah, great. And thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. Are there any requirements for businesses who receive funds to have any type of proof that they continue to employ their employees, or is that not a possibility?
Thank you. Honestly, that's not there. This has thus far been a rental assistance program. As I mentioned, our Department of Economic Development will be forthcoming with some next steps should council approve this Bill 21. But no, we have not asked for any reassurances from businesses that they will maintain levels of employment. We've only required businesses entering into this application and agreement to pay rent. And as you recall, we worked very aggressively to disperse funds so that businesses could make their April rents, or if they had made their April rents, make their May rent. So I beg your pardon, but no, there is not a requirement for future employment. I don't know that can be a dimension of our, future economic recovery, but understand your thoughts on that.
All right. Thank you very much. I know that's a sticky wicket. That's hard to do, but I would like to see that. But I know that's a very tough order. And then I finally just want to finish. I know we've had a lot of great questions, so I won't belabor, but I do want to say, I thought I heard you say that there's a tremendous amount of transparency in the spending of this overall money, in the reporting, that you would be putting that out eventually online, that not only council, but our residents can see every dollar spent for whatever it's spent for. And if that's the case, I'm hats off to you. I think that's very commendable, and I think that's great. And we all talk about transparency. And here's an example of the city being transparent. And if that's the case, I have to say thank you for that, because I think that's a really outstanding process you might be going through. That's all I have, but thank you for your work on this, and I plan to support this tonight. Thank you.
Council, as far as I can tell, with the interruptions we've been having here with the system, I don't have anyone else in the queue for any further comments on Council's Bill 21. If I'm missing someone, please verbalize it so I can hear from you. Otherwise, I'm going to move for a roll call vote on this item. All right, hearing no comments. Ms. Parker, this is Council's Bill number 21. Please conduct the roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Smith.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. I do have a few concerns with it as proposed. Just a lot of unanswered questions, but overall, due to it helping our reserve and helping us in the long run, I'm going to end up supporting this. So my answer is yes.
Smith votes yes. Councilor Bowles.
Yes, I'm also, did I unmute? There we go. I also want to vote yes, and I want to thank Mr. Dorr for answering questions and being very, very diligent and very detailed, and Ms. Opie and everyone else, and Mr. Tripp, who helped answer our questions on this. This is $9 million. It's big for the city. This is a big deal. It helps a lot of people. So I will be voting yes. Thank you.
Bowles votes yes. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. Councilor DeMott.
Yes.
DeMott votes yes. Mayor Pro Tem Seitz.
Yes.
Seitz votes yes. Councilor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully.
Yes.
Uh,
And Scully votes yes.
All right. Council, based on Council's Bill number 21, we have a 7-0 vote. I'm still having connectivity issues here, so if someone else has signed up for the next item on the agenda, which would be 10E, I cannot tell if someone is asked to be the maker of that motion. So if there's someone there who wants to verbalize that.
I'll do it, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Well, go ahead.
I move to authorize the mayor to sign an intergovernmental agreement with Adams County and the cities and towns of Adams County to fund a temporary full-time position on Adams County staff for the purpose of serving as the coordinator for efforts to ensure that most complete count of residents within the county during the 2020 census.
Ms. Smith, I think I see you on second.
Yes, sir. I second.
All right. Ms. Seitz, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a very brief question. Reading through the agenda packet, this may sound like a similar question to what Councilor DeMont stated earlier, but it does read as though this would only be for the Adams County portion of our census. And I was wondering, is there a similar effort that we're going to be participating in Jefferson County? And if not, are there any implications? I think we should take this opportunity right now to encourage all of our residents to fill out the census, just as Deputy City Manager Dorr was stating how important it is that our taxpayers get their fair share of those CARES dollars, those dollars they've already paid for. It's also important going forward that we get our fair share of federal dollars, and our census is one of the ways that we assure that. So I just want to make sure Jefferson County is also counted, and if not, do we have concerns about that?
Mr. Tripp.
Director Downing, could you explain how the Jefferson County side is going to be handled relative to this IGA?
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Dave Downing, Director of Community Development. To answer the specific question from the Mayor Pro Tem, yes, this particular IGA in front of you tonight is only for the Adams County portion of Westminster. On the Jefferson County side, staff has been trying to provide services to help publicize the census. And by the way, Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for your plug for asking everyone to fill out the census. That's an important thing to do. Staff has been handling it. We do not anticipate a similar IGA for the Jefferson County side of the city.
And just to be abundantly, it does. I just want to be abundantly clear. It is not because we are choosing not to participate. It's that there is not an opportunity like this that exists. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, ma'am, your understanding is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Demott, I think you're up next.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, Councilor Seitz beat me to the punch. That was going to be my question. So thanks for asking the question.
All right. Does anyone else have a question on this item? This is item 10E. All right, not seeing anything and not hearing anyone. Ms. Parker, let's move to a roll call vote for item 10E, please.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Bowles.
Yes.
Bowles votes yes. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. Councilor Demott.
Yes.
Demott votes yes. Mayor Pro Tem Seitz.
Yes.
Seitz votes yes. Councilor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully.
Yes.
Scully votes yes. Councilor Smith.
Yes.
And Smith votes yes.
Thank you, Council. We've moved on from item 10E, which passes on a vote of 7-0. Moving to the next item on this agenda is item 10F. And again, I cannot tell if there's anyone in the queue to make the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm in there. So,
all right, go ahead.
I move to authorize the city manager to execute a construction manager general contractor contract with Concrete Express Inc. for the pre-construction services for the Sheridan Boulevard Multimodal Transportation Improvement Project, an amount not to exceed $231,750 plus an additional $18,250 in contingency for a total authorized amount of $250,000.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Seitz, okay. I have a motion and a second for item 10F. Is there any discussion items by council? And if there is, you're going to need to verbalize who you are.
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilor Smith.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to commend for doing a CMGC contract. I know that design build, I've seen a multitude of different contracts executed throughout the years, and mostly they tend to run design build, but it's interesting that we've have set this up as a CMGC, which is the construction manager general contractor contract. So I just wanted to commend those for putting this together, because it does allow for a multitude of partnership in programming in the design and construction phase. So I just wanted to say hats off to those that have decided to go that way. The only thing that I'm a little bit leery on is less than a 10% contingency in this. I'm comfortable between anywhere from 10 to 20, but it's interesting that we went with 7.9. So I don't know if someone can speak to that, but good job on this. So thank you.
Mr. Tripp, I think you want to turn this to Mr. Downing and let him respond to the question about the contingency, or do you want to handle that?
It's a very large project. I think we see these numbers on the larger projects. Seth Plath is the engineer actually that is running this project, and so I know Seth is here. And let me ask Seth if he'd come forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Seth Plath, Capital Projects Administrator with the Department of Community Development. The reason for and I agree, I typically do a 10% contingency as well. In this case, there are some specific allowances for potholing and public information that we may be able to use as contingencies within the contract itself. So this would really be above and beyond the contingency that's within the fee itself.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Bowles, you have a comment or question?
Well, actually, yes. I'm sorry, I was on mute there. Councilor Smith took exactly what I was going to say and already said it. So I was also going to commend staff for, I'm more familiar with the design bid build contract format. And from what I read about this sounds like a great alternative. I would like to know a little bit more in the 5 key points of bidding the construction of this project. It says alternative construction methods that may save money. So what, can someone speak to that a little bit more? Like, how would we save money? What's an example of that? Have we done it in the past? Whenever I see that, I like that a lot. And if we can save taxpayers money in the scope of this project, I think that'd be very good. So can someone speak to what that might mean or what it might look like? Thank you.
Mr. Platts, will you answer that one as well?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Councilor Bowles. Yes, there are a couple opportunities that we might provide cost savings to the project. One of them being the actual underpass construction. Depending on the type of foundation that we use, which we intend to bring in the contractor to discuss options. There's certain advantages or disadvantages to doing different foundations for the underpass, and they have impacts on especially the traveling public. So one form of foundation could be a wider excavation footprint, which would increase the need for traffic control. Different type of foundation might add material costs, but reduce the traffic control and reduce cost. So I think the value is not only in the actual dollar cost savings, but it's also in the project duration and also the impacts to the traveling public, trying to find the best solution to install the underpass in essentially a state highway.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I appreciate that very much. And thanks for your work on this. I plan to support this. Thank you.
Council, any other questions or comments on item 10F? Seeing and hearing none, Ms. Parker, let's go for a roll call vote, please.
Certainly. Mayor Atchison.
Yes.
Atchison votes yes. Councilor DeMott.
Yes.
DeMott votes yes. Mayor Pro Tem Seitz.
Yes.
Seitz votes yes. Councilor Seymour.
Yes.
Seymour votes yes. Councilor Scully.
Yes.
Scully votes yes. Councilor Smith.
Yes.
Smith votes yes. And Councilor Bowles.
Yes.
And Bowles votes yes.
All right, thank you, Council. This is item 10F, passes on a 7-0 vote. That concludes the business activities that we have for tonight. We still have an update on our COVID-19 responses and some potential next steps. Council, I know you've had some interruptions tonight. I apologize. We've had a number of connection problems here at City Hall tonight for our being able to stay online. We finally went to a phone connection instead of the computer. So I'm going to turn over to Mr. Tripp, and Mr. Tripp, I'll leave my part till last. And if anyone needs a short bio break, I know you've been here for a long time. I don't know if you had a chance or not during the times we were out. I'm certainly entertain that if you need it, but you'll need to speak up because, again, I don't have a visual connection into what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just go into our EOC report from EOC head, Max Kirschbaum.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. There's just a couple of items that I'd like to address this evening. A couple of them have come up earlier in the discussion. I'd like to continue to use this opportunity to talk about expenditures thus far through the pandemic. As of today, as reported in the situation report you received today, the expenditure tracked so far are $282,000. Of that amount, some of those funds may be reimbursed through FEMA public assistance, some through grants that are being pursued, and some of that amount is even CARES eligible. But 282,000 is the total so far. Secondly, I'd like to talk for a second about the confirmed cases that is also contained in the situation report you received today. As of today, the Westminster number of confirmed cases that derives from either state or the 2 county public agencies stands at 326 confirmed cases. That's an increase of 26 cases since Friday. If you look at Jefferson County and Adams County numbers, I'll sum them together. That stands at a little over 4,500 confirmed cases, and that is an increase of over 400 confirmed cases since Friday. Some of those increases could be the result of increased testing. You need to bear that in mind as well, but that is a significant increase since Friday. Third, I'd like to talk about the EOC role in reopening plans reviews. At this time, we are finalizing review and recommendation to go forward to the city manager's office for Parks Rec and Libraries use of the City Park Recreation Center and Countryside Recreation Center for the sole purpose of supporting the summer camp program. So that would be a phased opening that is for that singular purpose at this time. Have reviewed and forwarded for city manager's final consideration the opening of tennis and pickleball courts as well as skate park, as those are self-directed outdoor activities. That's a pretty straightforward plan to review. Third on that list, a review has been completed and also forwarded for the phase 1 reopening of the municipal court. The court envisions opening in 2 or 3 phases that would span a period of the beginning of June to about the middle of July. It is the first phase that we have reviewed and recommend approval for. So that decision is pending in the near term. It's come up lastly, item number 4 I wanted to mention, it has come up a couple times in this discussion about face coverings. I can say that through the city manager's office, the Innovation and Communication Division specifically has researched and is working through the purchase of a bulk quantity of face coverings, specifically about 77,000 face coverings at a cost of about $33,000, and that is CARES money eligible, and that there would be a companion plan upon receipt of those masks for distribution primarily through business entities to be able to help them serve customers as they are able to reopen to public service. That's all I have for this evening, unless you have any questions.
Mr. Kirschbaum, in regards to the comment we had earlier, just before we went live, we do have that other 14,000 coming in from the other donation that we received. With that, along with the purchase that we're doing, do we anticipate at this point that we have an idea of where we would go with a second purchase?
given the that change in information on the donation that you described from 4,800 to 14,000, I think we need to take a look and see how the sum of these two stockpiles of masks would serve our community. I don't know that we would be able to say that there would be a need for a follow-on increment or not. That would, between those two sources, that would be about 50,000 masks.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Tripp, you want to move on to the financial update?
I think Deputy Andrews has an add here to this item.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Tripp. Deputy City Manager Jody Andrews. I can provide just a little bit more detail on the business face covering program. We have placed the order actually for 30,000 reusable cloth masks. Those are made in the USA and being manufactured right now, and we do expect very early delivery of those masks as early as the end of this week. We're working on an outreach right now to our business community to gauge the interest and to begin plans for distributing masks to businesses that would desire help getting masks for their customers. So these are reusable cloth masks that would be face coverings that would be sent to businesses or picked up by businesses in a curbside model from one or more of our facilities, and then distributed by that business to their customers. We're looking at delivery to businesses or pick up by those businesses, I should say, at our facilities as early as next week. So we are going to get the survey out here in the next day or so to those businesses, and the mask program will be underway by next week.
Thank you,
Any
Joe.
other comments on this one?
I realize I
Max.
transposed the number and the dollar amount when I presented that. Thank you for that correction.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kirschbaum. And I think at this point, I'm going to transition, if you don't mind, to Larry Dorr, Chief Financial Officer, to provide a very brief financial update for this evening.
Thank you, Deputy Manager Andrews. Mayor and Council, typically we would have a monthly financial report for you on the fourth week of the month. And of course, that will occur during the Memorial Day holiday this coming Monday. So it will be delayed at least 1 week, and we'll have the traditional report. And I'll have some add-on comments. We're going to produce a few more details via a COVID-19 financial bulletin, which will involve some of our sectors and so forth. Let me just give you these quick comments. This will only involve our March sales taxes, which, as you know, were just only impacted in a smaller amount relative to April and the months of May, which will still be forthcoming. So more details in the future, but I can tell you I've already previewed the reports and I don't see any cause for a change in policy or direction at this point. Unfortunately, of course, revenues were down for things like recreation and other activities, and also for sales tax for the month of March, but nothing that causes us to change our course, and I will provide an update. As a silver lining, I will tell you, just as an aside, with our golf operations open for just 9 days, Director Genk has reported to me that we've collected just under $60,000 in revenue from our golf patrons in that short period of time. So I will have more details for you in the future, but not on the Memorial Day coming holiday. And again, in my preliminary review of all the numbers, I don't see any reason to change course or direction. So with that, Mr. Tripp, unless there are any questions or comments, we may move on to the next subject.
Thank you. Councilor Dave DeMott raised this question after for the public. So you know, the city staff provides the council with daily updates 4 days a week as to a lot of fast changing, sometimes things that are happening in all the aspects of the COVID response. And one of those updates included mention from the Parks, Rec, and Libraries Department that we're not planning to reopen for the summer countryside pool. And the reason for that that's been reported. And then I'll ask Councilor Demott to ask any further questions he might have. We have staff here ready to answer those. The reason is that it's not, at this point, outdoor and indoor swimming both are not permitted under both the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Jefferson County Public Health orders. And if there is a change to that, which we don't know whether there will or there won't be, it creates a bit of difficulty in terms of staffing. And we really are looking forward, if there is a change, to dedicating resources towards our two larger facilities at Swim Fit Center and in historic Westminster and City Park Recreation Center. We don't have lifeguards ready to serve that pool, and we aren't hiring any part-time lifeguards right now because we don't know whether we'll have any swimming. It will take a few days to get the pool ready. That would be possible should we change course here and want to open Countryside, but it would be difficult to train seasonal guards when we don't have a pool available right now and can't open a pool to train those seasonal guards we bring on. And again, as I said, if the state does permit swimming, which we're hopeful, but not necessarily predicting, the priority would be to open City Park Rec Center and the Swim Fitness Center because they're larger facilities and they can provide a much better opportunity for social distancing. And that's the final thing that I'd say is that Countryside, being the smaller size facility with the configuration it is, we've got some concerns about being able to meet that requirement. So we're disappointed to have to not offer many of the kinds of services that we've traditionally offered in the summer. And I know Jason and his team are working hard and wisely to try to come back with a full regimen of different kinds of activities that serve all the neighborhoods and communities. So Councilor Demott, that's the update that I'd have for you in what's been provided to me, and we'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that extensive feedback. I would say a couple of things, that have my mind on that particular one. So obviously pretty familiar with that one because it's practically in my backyard. And I know a lot of the people who actually are the seasonal lifeguards at that pool who come home from college and work there since high school. So I guess I was just disappointed to see that was going to be a for sure thing through the summer. It's not typically a super crowded pool as far as I know. So I was hoping that if an opportunity arises that we would at least evaluate it throughout the summer. If you get, say, a month into June and most of the summer is still there, that potentially we could at least try to evaluate a way to do it.
I think
Are there other comments on this item? Go ahead, John.
I'd like to comment. Councilor Demott, we'd like to stay open-minded on that. Let's see what happens with this order in the next week. We're going to know an awful lot more even in 7 or 10 days than we know today. And we'll also know, hopefully we'll have some guidance. If there is going to be an opening allowed for swimming pools, we'll have some very specific guidance as to how that will be permitted, because it'll be really hard to do. With the requirements the state has for bathing, washing off before you get in the pool, are we going to be able to have locker rooms open? So it is, it's up in the air, but I appreciate that. And I think it's fair to respond to that by saying, let's tell you, we'll keep an open mind and see what it brings forward. And I promise you that if it just looks completely impossible, we'll be back at you immediately, not waiting for a meeting, but reporting back to you what we've found out. And I appreciate your interest. It's a wonderful neighborhood facility. I know that there are plans to replace it with some different sorts of things that we hope to have underway in that, in the Countryside building itself. But thank you for the question.
Yep. No, I appreciate your willingness to be open-minded about it. There are, as I think through it, and I know my neighborhood, I think there's some people who, may not be able to, it would be more difficult for them to get to those other facilities. Not that I don't think they're important. So I appreciate it. And those are all of my questions.
Mr. Tripp, you have anything else on your items?
Mr. Mayor, if I
Mr. Seymour, did you? Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Too, I want to thank City Manager Tripp on that, because that pool is not too far from my home either. And I appreciate the willingness to look at that. I do understand lifeguard training and safety, and then plus the social distancing part of that. I think there'll be adequate staff available if that's a part that's a deficit. And I'm very happy that we can kind of look and see what's coming up through the governor and through the health departments as we move through the summer. But thank you very much for keeping an open mind on that.
Other comments on any of the three items that the staff has brought up? If council members have a question or comment they want to do. Ms.
Mr.
Smith?
Mayor, thank you. I do have a quick question on, and it kind of relates to COVID updates, but the autonomous vehicle pilot project that we just got updated on today, could you speak more onto that? Can people participate in this, and if so, how? And I just reading quickly, it's involved in a certain geographical location. Is it available to others in Westminster? I just found it interesting. So if someone could speak to that, that would be very helpful. So thank you.
Mr. Tripp, you have anybody that has knowledge of this?
Well, we sure better have, because it sounds like we're talking about it. So I appreciate the question, Councilor Smith. Whose is this? Let's bring them on and provide an update and some answers to the councilor's questions, please.
It's Jason Gay.
This is Ryan.
Oh, Ryan, you go right ahead, sir.
Sorry about that. This is Ryan Hegernus, Innovation and Communication Manager, and I'd be happy for Mr. Genk to fill in any missing details. But as you received information today, this is a pilot project. The vehicle is provided by Easy Mile and owned by Easy Mile. And this is simply a pilot project that will be transporting food from the MAC where it's in storage to Growing Home. There will not be riders participating in this, and there, at this time, it's just simply that one route. This does provide the city an opportunity to pilot autonomous vehicles and learn from this experience. We've been working closely with CDOT and the police department to ensure that all plans are reviewed, and we will have staff and police to ensure for the brief segments where it is on public roads that we have flaggers and traffic control. Again, this will be a project for just a few months here to pilot this technology and to also provide this service to transport materials in a new way.
Mr. Genk, you have anything to offer? Mr. Genk, did you have anything else to add on to what Mr. Hegernus reported?
It looks like maybe Jason may be having some of his own connection problems, or didn't.
We are trying to get him back on. He should be here just momentarily. If you guys can just bear with us for 1 second.
Thank you, Michelle.
This is Ryan Hegernus again, Innovation Communication Manager. I did receive a notice from Mr. Genk that he is having some connectivity difficulties, but that he does not have any additional insights to add at this time.
All right, Ms. Smith, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions on the three items that the staff reported on from any member of council?
Mr. Mayor, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Seymour.
Thank you. Just another forward-looking issue. Very much appreciate some of the things that we heard from the governor's office today regarding the reopening of restaurants. And I hope as we move forward that, especially being the liaison for the special permits and licensing, that we look at ways to be adaptive and to help our local restaurants and brew pubs expand literally expand their capability into their sidewalks and parking lots, and take some of that guidance from the governor's office on how we can keep people separated, but also being able to use their dollars here in Westminster. So thank you very much.
You know, in light of what Mr. Seymour just raised, I received the proposed guidance this afternoon. I have given that to staff. We have 2 days to respond to the proposal that's out of the governor's office that has not been finalized. He will make the final decision and issue that order. Right now, it looks like still going to stay with the 25th, but we've been given the opportunity to provide comments back on that preliminary piece, and staff has got that as of late this afternoon to start working on. I was going to bring that up in part of my comments later, but thank you, Mr. Seymour, for bringing that up, because we do want to look at that carefully to make sure that what we're potentially authorizing doesn't create a safety problem, especially with potential extensions into the street areas. Mr. Seymour, do you have any other comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Any other members from council, again, have comments on the material provided by staff? I'll give you a couple of quick updates. Some of the things that we discussed this morning earlier, where a number of the council members were there. The Growing Home product that we're trying to help them with from here in the city. Again, they're going to be launching the Front Porch Pickup Food Drive that will continue throughout the summer. We'll kick off an in-person event on May the 30th between 9 and noon. Representative Byrd has asked for help in promoting this in-person and social distancing safely event by sharing it on your networks and encouraging people to either donate money directly to Growing Home or by contributing much needed in-kind donations to the MAC Community Center in South Westminster on the 30th. Updates to the Safer at Home Act are expected from the governor on the 25th. They will in turn then require updates by individual health departments depending upon what comes out of there to see if there's going to be any further add-ons to those restrictions that are being potentially modified by the governor. The critical business received a new updated order over the weekend. The critical business and essential businesses facial covering requirements that were scheduled to end at the end of May have been extended to June the 17th at this time. So that will still be a facial covering for all employees of critical and essential businesses will continue to go forward. We've had a lot of comments back and forth about what's happening. We're seeing still a change by the day on interpretations of what people are doing or not doing. We want to help as much as we can to make sure we're protecting our safety of our employees. We appreciate everything that our first responders and our health care providers are doing. Friday morning of this past week, there was a very quiet event as far as not publicly advertised because they didn't want to deal with the social distancing. But all of our communities surrounding the Westminster, including ourselves, participated in a Heroes Parade at St. Anthony's North. Fire engines, EMS trucks, ambulances, police trucks, and vehicles were all responding to that. We had a great showing. The members of the staff at the St. Anthony Hospital were very appreciative, and they in turn created signs thanking all of our first responders. And although the parade was very short, it continued around the building for one loop. We appreciate all the first responders and the groups and cities that help participate in that, showing our appreciation for everything that our healthcare providers provide. Ms. Scully, did you have a comment? I'm still having connection problems here, so I think you did.
No, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to thank the city for their great reports tonight. They were very thorough and I appreciated the information.
Okay. If there are no other comments or questions from the council at this point, I believe we've covered all the items that we have for business and we've covered our COVID updates. Staff will have captured all the comments that have been done. Apologize for the interruptions, but we've continued to have connection problems here at City Hall tonight, so we'll continue to try to work on those, and hopefully the next time we meet will be a little bit more sound. Last minute reminder that next Monday is Memorial Day. We will not be having a council meeting that night, so enjoy the weekend. Be safe and take care of each other. With that, it's approximately 9:51. We are adjourned.